The Denver Nuggets get exposed and embarrassed by the Minnesota Timberwolves. I picked them to win the championship, so I too got exposed and embarrassed by the Minnesota Timberwolves. We're going to talk about what went wrong for both of us, what Denver can do going forward, and why their options are limited. So let's start with why did I think that they were going to win the championship? Denver has succeeded with the formula over the last several seasons. Among the league best offensively, league average defense. You have the elite pairing of Jokic and Murray, and that carries them deep in the playoffs. And provided the roster stayed healthy, they were going to be in business. And I thought this year looked good for them. But what I failed to realize was how thin their roster was in terms of the qualities that Aaron Gordon brought. Because once Aaron Gordon was not able to play, this Denver team was like fighting with a hand tied behind its back. This is not an excuse for why they lost the series, that Aaron Gordon was injured. Clearly, Minnesota had more injury problems than Denver's. Minnesota beat them down handily, but it's because Denver suddenly lost a ton of strengths that were tied to a single player, and that's a roster construction problem. You cannot allow your roster to collapse because of the absence of a single player. Every team is going to get worse when a key player is off the floor, but you need to build your roster such that you could at least maintain the same identity with them not playing. For example, the Minnesota Timberwolves, they lose Anthony Edwards, right? One of the core capabilities he provides that team is his relentless attacking to the basket and putting pressure on the rim to drive and dunk over their interior defenders. He leaves. Terrence Shannon Jr., you saw in that Game 6, consistently attacked the key. He's still putting that pressure on Denver. It's not to the degree that Anthony Edwards is, but it's still, the threat is still there. So it's not having a hand tied behind your back. You're still able to throw a punch. It's a weaker punch, but you're still able to throw it. And that's what happened to Denver, in my opinion. Aaron Gordon was the only player on the roster providing them with an inside presence, both offensively and defensively, an above-the-rim capability to catch lobs, and also rim protection on the defensive end. Zero rim protection from Denver. So let's start with the defense, because I think there's more to say about the offense. Minnesota could attack them over and over relentlessly. No interior presence defensively, no rebounding. Denver was struggling to get rebounds and to prevent Minnesota from attacking the basket. That's why McDaniels had such success. These big bodies getting by these average perimeter defenders, getting into the key where there is zero resistance. That's not a formula for success. Aaron Gordon was basically the only player on this roster that could put up a fight defensively, both as a primary perimeter defender, but also as an interior presence. Let's look at the offense. Over and over, Denver was doing the same thing. Dribble handoff with Jokic at the top of the key, whether it was Murray, Tyus Jones, Cam Johnson, even Tim Hardaway Jr. got in there. Somebody running back and forth past Jokic, hoping that Minnesota made some kind of mistake in negotiating that switch, giving the separation to get a quality shot. Minnesota is an elite defensive team with switchable, long defenders. They are going to make very few mistakes when it comes to switching. They're as well suited as anybody to make those switches frictionless, and they're already applying elite ball pressure. So separation was hard to find for Denver, and you saw that with Murray and Jokic. It felt like it took them tons of energy just to get the ball on the other side of half court. And that was the only area of the floor where they were operating offensively. They were doing their little handoff, hoping to catch some defender out of position so that they could either kick it out for a three or they got Jokic on a roll. None of it was working, though. How many times did we see a Denver Nugget even dunk the basketball? How many times did we see somebody score inside the paint? No short corner action. Nothing above the rim. Typically with the Jokic and Murray pick and roll, you have Gordon lurking in the short corner spot, ready to catch a lob. None of that existed for the Denver Nuggets. They only attacked Minnesota in a very narrow set of ways. And if you're going to beat an elite defensive team, you have to diversify the ways that you threaten them. Gordon being off the floor meant that Denver only had a couple of pitches in its arsenal, And if you go against an elite defensive team only attacking them in very predictable ways, you become very easy to defend. Peyton Watson being out hurt Denver too, but I think that Gordon actually proved to be the head of the snake when it comes to the Denver Nuggets. So I recognize that now, how shallow the roster was in those capabilities. Hopefully won't make that same mistake with predictions going forward. This Denver team suddenly, with the loss of Gordon and to a lesser extent Watson, that league best offense is now a league average offense. That league average defense is now a league worst defense. And that's why it didn't matter that Minnesota lost their players. Denver was just a very limited team, whereas Minnesota was able to keep doing what they do, play their game, albeit at a lesser intensity because of the talent that they were missing. Let's get to the options that Denver has to fix this mess, because they're very limited. And that's why in my recent episode, I said that Denver isn't going to blow it up and panic at a loss against Minnesota, because there's not much they could do that actually meets the burden of being as good or better than they were this year. They're going to have to worry about that massive extension that Jokic is going to be eligible for. So that serves as a backdrop for all of this conversation about what Denver could possibly do going into next season. The most likely outcome, in my opinion, they find some team to dump Christian Braun's contract on. I think they need that money to re-sign Peyton Watson. And I think Peyton Watson now becomes very important to this team, given their challenges with athleticism and youth. They can't just let him walk. I think their starting lineup going into next season is going to be Murray, Watson, Cam Johnson, Gordon, Jokic. And they're going to do their best around the edges of the roster to bargain hunt. I think they're going to waive Valanciunas. He's on the books for $10 million, only guaranteed for $2 million. That's going to give them some money to make some offers. And I think that's all they're going to do going into next season, outside of firing David Adelman. He better be packing his bags already. They could, in theory, thread the needle of making sure this team is as good as it was this year, while buying themselves a little more runway by acquiring young players, maybe acquiring a pick. Basically the same approach that Minnesota took in trading Karl Anthony Towns. How do we fill out the roster while not getting worse? By trading a high-priced player. Generally, contending teams are on the other side of that deal, right? They're the ones consolidating lesser players with picks in order to acquire the better player. It's very difficult to be the one trading the better player and still on the court having the same talent level. I've got a couple of Murray ideas. I didn't bother looking up Aaron Gordon ideas. I don't think that that's likely. I think if Denver's going to break up their core, Murray's the more likely candidate given his $50 million salary. 2 trade ideas for sending Murray somewhere. The first one is Sacramento. They should trade Sabonis and completely rebuild, but this is the Sacramento Kings we're talking about. I could see them talking themselves into Murray and Sabonis having similar success as far as their on-court pairing that Murray and Jokic had. The trade would be Murray for Zach LaVine. LaVine is looking at a player option next season for $49 million. So that would be Denver acquiring equivalent offensive production, albeit a totally different player. He would not be the pick and roll partner with Jokic that Murray is. He could give you that scoring punch as a secondary scorer that Murray was giving you. But the important part is you would be looking at a $49 million expiring contract, freeing up all that money on your books going into the season that Jokic needs an extension. And potentially you could be looking at some space to sign some players in free agency. Because of the lack of trade assets, it's very possible that Denver needs to prioritize having flexibility to participate in free agency. The other Murray trade that I like a lot more, that I think is much more analogous to the Karl Anthony Towns trade Minnesota made with the Knicks, is with Toronto. Toronto has been giving Cleveland all they could handle in this series without Emmanuel Quickley. They're clearly looking to be a consistent playoff contender with Scotty Barnes as their centerpiece. I think they would be interested in the prospect of upgrading Emmanuel Quickley to Jamal Murray. Quickley's making $32.5 million flat for the next several seasons. That helps Denver in a big way as their roster gets more expensive. Murray's at $50 million, so we're going to need another player at least thrown in on Toronto's side so they're not acquiring too much money. I think they would be interested in including Grady Dick in this trade. Grady Dick fell completely out of favor with Toronto. We're not seeing him on the floor. He's not in their rotation. Next year is the last year guaranteed for him before he hits restricted free agency. I think Toronto is very much open to moving him, and if he's not in a deal like this, he'll be moved at some point. They do not want to extend him. And so moving him to some team that still believes in him having upside is the better move for them. So Quickly and Grady Dick for Jamal Murray. On paper, that's close enough to me to be a realistic move. What does Denver get out of the deal? They get $10 million in cap savings right away, but more than that in the coming seasons because of the flat structure of Quickly's contract as opposed to Murray's escalating money. You get a young shooting guard in Grady Dick, which I think they're going to need because I expect them to dump Christian Brown. And you acquire a starting point guard to slot into that Jamal Murray spot. And maybe you look at Jokic and say, is this guy so great as an offensive player that we can just pair him with offensively talented guards and he's going to get the most out of everybody around him? Is there really a big drop-off between Jamal Murray to Emmanuel Quickley from Denver's perspective? I think it's very reasonable for them to conclude that there isn't, and all these other benefits from the cap perspective are going to help them fill out their roster in a way that keeping Murray on the team is not going to allow them to do. So that's what we're looking at for this Denver Nuggets offseason. This will not be our only conversation about this because they face such a complex situation. Aging star player going to get a supermax, expensive aging roster outside of him with some key weaknesses, thin and some key capabilities that are going to help you compete with the top of the Western Conference, and no draft assets to trade. This is a bleak position they find themselves in.